In this project, the place where I work part-time, we needed a rack to store our propane bottles safely outdoors. And these can run quite a few $100s to purchase, so I decided I would try and build something just from materials we had on site. And not everybody needs a propane rack, I know, but the idea of the project is to give anybody that's viewing these videos some ideas on how to construct and put together something that they could use for whatever purpose. This just happens to be a propane rack. So let's get on with it, and I'll show you what I did and how I did this project. Here's the finished product. It's basically a rack for outside to store our propane bottles. Now, I wanted to build the propane rack as cheap as possible, and you could probably say this is as cheap as possible because it didn't cost me anything other than labor. The materials we had on site, we had a steel shelving rack. It's actually on rolling casters, so it was easy to build around it because I could just roll the project around in the shop when I was welding. We had some fencing, some wire mesh fencing in our storage, and we were just scrap metal, so I cut out all the screening and I welded that to the framework that I welded up from the shelf brackets. And it has a top on it. It actually has two tops. There's a shelf above the upper row of bottles there, right directly above it at that cross member, and then there's a top shelf as well for protection from the elements. So we've got a rack here that we can store 8 bottles quite comfortably, and it works very well. I made a one-piece door by welding up shelf brackets together and then welding the screening onto it, which made it a very strong door as far as racking. It didn't twist or anything, but it was fairly heavy, so I had to use some reasonably strong hinges. This side shot shows you the thickness of the rack, and it takes up very little space, and we have it located right near our propane fill. I came up with a simple idea for a latch. I just used a regular gate latch that I had laying around from an old fence I had, and welded that to the framework, and it just closes on a pin, and it also has provision for a padlock if we need to lock this for security purposes. As I mentioned before, the door was fairly heavy once constructed, so I had to put on some substantial hinges, and what I used was the brass regular hinges you would use on a house interior door, and in the place you can see the hinges marked with the blue arrow, and the orange arrow indicates a piece of scrap metal that I welded in place for backing for the hinge. Not pretty, but you must consider that everything is scrap, and this isn't costing us anything at all. And as I mentioned earlier, not everybody needs a propane rack, but it gives you some ideas of what you can do with just some scrap materials. Reuse, reuse. That's my motto. Well, thanks for watching. Now get out there and build something.